tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So as we've talked about many times, to go back to the earliest layer of the teachings, in some ways the fundamental insight of the Buddha is an insight about time. It's the first thing he realizes on the night of his awakening is the realization of his past lives. And he says, I saw many, many cosmic eons worth of past lives in all of their details. And so in seeing this, he understands how actions give rise to states, and states give rise to, future states, how our actions condition our futures. Right? The first insight is his own past lives, and his second insight is into how this works for others, that this is the nature of action, or kamma in Pali, karma in Sanskrit, to create ripples or to have impact in the world, and that impact then reverberates. And our own actions are the strongest condition, one of the very strong conditions that creates our own future states. They're not the only condition, so everything you suffer is not your fault, but the states of mind with which we meet the various, worldly winds, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, etc., the skills and the states, the possibilities in our own heart with which we meet the complexity of the world, those are part of the karmic stream that we carry. And the Buddha recognized that this has been going on for a very long time, and since beginningless time. And very interestingly, the Buddha says you can't find a beginning of time. You can't find it. At one point, a deity shows up for the Buddha, and the deity says, in my past life, in my immediate past life, I was a powerful ascetic, a human. I was a skywalker, and so with one step I could step across the entire continent. And so I thought, well, I can travel far, kind of a mystical windwalker, skywalker. He says, my question was, can I get to the end of the universe by walking? Is it possible to get there? And he doesn't get there. He walks and walks and walks for an entire lifetime, cosmically long lifetime, walking unimaginably far with his, mystical superpower, and he dies before he gets to the end of the universe. So then he's reborn as a deity, comes to the Buddha and says, so, is it possible? Is there an end? And the Buddha says, you can't get to the end of the universe by walking. And it's the same in space as in time. He says, you can't find the beginning of time. To the skywalker who's looking for the end of space, he gives a bodily instruction. He says, just here in this fathom-long body is found the beginning of the universe, the cause of the universe, the end of the universe, and the path to the end. He uses the model of the Four Noble Truths. This is Y-RYT, the skywalker. So there's no beginning to time, the Buddha says, but his insight is that he, and by extension all the rest of us, has been present for the whole thing. And this, I think, is the kind of this is one of the earth-shaking aspects of this insight. Because our conventional experience is to think that we've only been present for the amount of time that we can remember. And most of us can't remember further back, past, like into our own infancy. There's that period somewhere in the range of, 3 years old or so called childhood amnesia, where it's hard to remember past it. You can, sometimes on a, deep in meditation or on a psychedelic trip or deep in ceremony, you can remember back into infancy. Sometimes, there are types of body work that do, repair for the one who was traumatized in the womb. beautiful forms of body work, like Ray Castellino's womb surround process, where you re-embody the womb space and the birth process with the help of several friends. Trippy little healing process, extraordinary work. Some of you might be familiar with that work. But there's this merge between memory and worldview, where if I didn't remember it, I wasn't there for it. That's the felt sense. Mindfulness, the word for mindfulness in Pali is sati, the Sanskrit is smriti, and it literally means memory or remembering. And there is a quality of mindfulness that says that mindfulness is the quality that enables you to remember things that were done and said long ago. That's one of the definitions of mindfulness in the Pali Canon. And so, right, because what are we doing when we're mindful, right? We're aware of our bodies and our senses and our movements and our feelings and our states, the things we do. Why do we remember what we remember? In the course of this lifetime, generally we remember things that had strong emotional charge. So when you were remembering back through the span of this life, very likely the snapshots that stood out were moments where there was some intensity. You know, I remember the moments that I was bullied in high school and my first kiss, and the moments when I won something or lost something or was treated very beautifully or very poorly. Do I remember all of the long, monotonous afternoons walking across town, having a peanut butter sandwich, being bored, watching the television, talking with my friends about whatever we talked about behind the band room in 1984, Doctor Who mostly, I think. Like, barely, right? I have a kind of very vague, like long stretch of hazy California summer times that were just hot, and I don't even know what I did for those long months, right? Except for the moments of emotional intensity that sear themselves into the storyline I call myself. So memory is not a film strip, right? Memory is a very creative, selective, mythic, co-creative process where the self is born and evolves and grows and changes in relationship to others. And so the Buddha then says there's this quality, mindfulness. What does it do? It shines a light on moments and it makes them memorable, right? Because what happened when there was emotional intensity? You were really there for it. You noticed. You got snapped out of your trance of, mindlessly chatting about Doctor Who, and suddenly somebody was fighting, or somebody was, falling in love, or something was happening, and you noticed it. That's why we know where we were when fill in the blank, whatever event, marks your generation, right? You know where you were, on 9/11. You know where you were when, JFK was shot. You know where you were, So, when I know where I was the morning of the Challenger disaster explosion. All the different things, moments of intensity, sear themselves in. And so the Buddha says then, okay, but when you practice this thing called mindfulness, it's not just about being present in this moment, but it's about also planting a seed that this moment is memorable. When our teacher's teacher, so my grandmother teacher, so if you think of me as your teacher, your great-grandmother teacher, through Jack Kornfield to Dipa Ma, the great mystic of Calcutta in the 60s, 70s, 1980s, was around, taught in the States a few times, so back at IMS. And she said that she had the intuition that she was present in the time of the Buddha, that she had studied with the Buddha. And she wanted to hear him directly in her current incarnation. So she says she remembered her way back through the various births to the time of the Buddha so that she could listen to him. And someone said, "How did you do that?" And she said, "Mind moment by mind moment." And so there's a way that profound mindfulness actually enables you to stitch together the past, to stitch between the islands of, intensity, to actually remember this lifetime as a continuity of sorts. Very interesting that this memory practice emphasizes continuity rather than discontinuity, the way we usually would in vipassana, where we're noticing impermanence and the dissolving of things. That's true also. For the rebirth practice, you feel back, and even back beyond the border of this life, back into the womb, to the moment of conception, and then what was before. And the practice of remembering one's past lives in one of the formal models that it's done nowadays, like in the very Abhidhamma-centered Feit Oakes system in Burma. And it takes a lot of concentration to do this. You have to master the jhanas first to do this and do many layers of very deep investigation, deep vipassana. But at a certain point, you get to the practice of remembering past lives. Full disclosure, I have not done this. I have this on report from close friends who have done it. But the report goes something like, you remember, you clarify the attention in jhana until it's quite clear, and then you remember back to the moment of appearing in this birth, the moment after conception, and then there's a mind moment of the change between the past life and this one, and practitioners are instructed to go back across that strange barrier to the moment of death in the previous life, and then back into this life, and then back to the moment of death in the previous life, and back into the beginning of this life, to really feel the link. And one contemporary teacher, Shaila Catherine, says, most students, okay, the Buddha did, hundreds of thousands of lifetimes. Most students, you only have to go back 4 or 5, lifetimes, and then you've kind of got the gist of it. People with extraordinary concentration talk like this. They're like, yeah, you just do this. And I'm like, yeah, good for you, buddy. Blessings to Shaila, who talks so casually about such extraordinary practices. They all do in a certain way, folks with the jhana virtuosos. But that's the practice. And so the Buddha does this. And the Buddha tells stories about, the deep, deep past. Last month in the Digha Nikaya book club, we read the story of King Mahasudassana, who spent 84,000 years as a child, studying, 84,000 years as a family man raising his family, 84,000 years as a king, and then 84,000 years retired as an ascetic seeker, and the text is so casual about it. Everyone at that time apparently lives that long, because there's a passage where his wife comes to him, and it literally says, at the hundreds of thousands of years had gone by, and the Buddha says, after many hundred thousand years, Queen Subhadha thought, "It is a long time since I saw King Mahasudassana. Suppose I were to go and see him." So, this is soft pedaling the issue a bit. She hasn't seen him for hundreds of thousands of years, but they've both been alive for many hundreds of thousands of years. So he's really just been in his retreat cabin for a fairly long time. And she goes to him, and this is part of ancient Indian, the ancient Indian mythos. Some of you might have heard from like in the Hindu tradition, the yogic traditions, the idea that there are 4 ages of the world. The first one is a kind of golden age where people have enormously long lives. The second one is a little bit more diminished. Lifespans are somewhat shorter. Evil is starting to come into the world. In the third one, lifespans are substantially diminished. Things are significantly worse off. And in the fourth one, lifespans are extremely diminished. Life is quite difficult, and it might dishearten you to know that the general consensus is that we are somewhere near the beginning of this fourth diminished age, where things are only going to get worse for a while before they kind of hit the nadir, they hit the bottom, and they rebound into another golden age, and it's cyclic. It goes around and around and around. And the Buddha's idea essentially is the same. And the golden age is partly determined by people's lives. And so, back then in the time of the Buddha, Vesantara, people had lifespans of, 84,000 years, He says, there was a Buddha whose lifespan was 80,000 years, then one whose lifespan was 70,000, 60,000, 50,000, all the way down. And he says, but for me, my lifespan, like humans now, is a mere 100 years at most. He lived to be 80. So there's this conception then, through the idea of rebirth, that we have been, that the universe is not only unimaginably vast and ancient and cyclic, beginningless, but that in a way that can be contacted through practice, that we each have been present for that entire span. And this is a critical insight, I think, for the faith. Because if it's not true, if our experience is truly boundaried by birth and death, if before birth none of that concerned us, and after our death nothing concerns us, the whole theory of karma, of actions having impact not just for others but for ourselves, and for the path to liberation depending on uprooting the causes of future suffering, so that there will be no more endless rounds of misery. That whole thing crumbles if we are beings that are so ephemeral that we're bounded by birth and death without conscious experience on either side. Because even though I know you feel quite generous toward the well-being of others and quite compassionate, it is hard to construct a functional ethical philosophy in a nihilistic system. And nihilistic doesn't mean that nothing is meaningful, but it's a philosophically speaking, it's a nihilism to propose that after our death there is nothing that we can experience. Because then, it's like, well, anyone can tolerate a few decades of misery. People do it all the time, right? And then you just die. And if dying just meant that you were done forever with misery, what is the path? Stephen Batchelor wrestles with this because he wants to discard rebirth from his philosophy and still be a faithful Buddhist. And what he comes up with is the path is good in this lifetime. It makes for a better life in this lifetime. And I totally agree with him there. But I don't know if the cosmic edifice of the Four Noble Truths and the Dhamma that the Buddha speaks about so frequently as pointing us toward a subtle liberation that is huge, that is far vaster than being happy in this lifetime. I don't know what to do with that if I completely shut down myself to the idea of an infinite stream of time that I'm participating in. The Buddha's insight is that he's participating in the stream of time forever. And this is the motivation for liberation, because participating in the stream of time means participating in gain and loss, pleasure and pain, birth and death, over and over and over and over again. And at a certain point, it seems to be, and this is not a popular theory, this is not a popular teaching nowadays, but you're my friends, I'm trying to say it kindly. It seems to be that the Buddha's assessment was that even though life in many, many ways is extraordinarily beautiful and stunning and filled with wonder, that on balance, returning again and again and again for it, and remember that a lot of those lifetimes are not steeped in wonder and awe, but they are lifetimes, somewhere deep in the middle of the predator-prey cycle, and, lots of misery. Living beings experience lots of pain. That on balance, it's not worth it to do it forever. Maybe it's worth doing it for a very long time. It clearly must be because you've wanted to, right? We're here because we weren't done with it. The idea in the Dharma, in a certain way, the idea of profound letting go is that if you really tire of it, you'll be done. Like, all you have to do is not want that. And then renunciation kicks in, and you're done. You're done with falling in love. You're done with grieving the dead. You're done. You're like, I accept it all. And I don't need to roll the wheel anymore. Blessings to everybody. And you become one of the arahants, no longer subject to birth. This is just the mystery at the heart of the whole faith, and I can't speak logically about it, so I'm not going to try. The Buddha says he remembered the past in a cosmic way, and he decided to no longer proceed. And that in doing so, an extraordinary ease and happiness opened in his heart that never left. And then he realized that anyone can do this and live an extraordinarily happy life in this lifetime simply by letting go of no longer doing this, no longer being bound in this way to this wheel. So that's the first layer. That's the first turning, as it were. So just a tiny bit about the second turning. We've been reading the perfection of wisdom. Bodhisattvas live in this vast span of time, and even more than arahants. Bodhisattvas realize that what they really want, because they have given rise to the mind of infinite compassion, what they want is to become a fully awakened Buddha. Arahants are liberated. Some of them teach and some of them don't. But fully awakened Buddhas, they establish a lineage of radiant teaching that liberates countless beings. To become a Buddha is an extraordinary thing, right? They happen quite rarely. But because time is infinite, they actually happen in an infinite number of times, even though it's quite rare, right? What's a few cosmic eons between Buddhas if time is beginningless? And so then bodhisattvas vow to become Buddhas, not arahants. And they vow to bring to perfection the qualities that make Buddhas. And they vow to give rise in their own hearts to this wisdom that gives birth to Buddhas, which means they vow to contact the perfection of wisdom, to bring wisdom to perfection. Wisdom is their mother, the mother of all the Buddhas. Prajna paramita becomes a goddess, the goddess of the bodhisattvas who give themselves cosmically to the cultivation of full awakening without anything left behind. And so bodhisattvas live in this vast span of time, and the idea arises that to be a bodhisattva, we've talked about this before, is to not be afraid of this, to not be afraid of emptiness, right? But also to not be afraid of this participating in the vast stream of time. But the idea also arises, and this is mysterious. The text that we're reading, The Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 Lines, will say that if someone is a bodhisattva now and has faith, has passion for this path, this is a very subtle and difficult path to enter, so likely they've been on it for a long time. And if someone is rejecting the path now, it's not like they were on it before. You don't lose faith in something this vast. And so if you're rejecting it now, you very likely have rejected it for a very long time. And they come up with this interesting idea that the path of cultivation then, I think the conclusion is that it's quite slow. cosmic eons to develop the perfections. And so if you're interested in developing them now, you've probably been interested in developing them for cosmic eons already. And then the idea comes that to be a bodhisattva, actually, because a bodhisattva is one who is destined for Buddhahood. How do you know you're destined for Buddhahood and you're not just being completely deluded? Well, here's the idea. Bodhisattvas actually, at one point in the distant past or in a future to come, they meet a Buddha face to face. And they make a vow to become a Buddha in the presence of a previous Buddha. And that Buddha gives them a prediction that they will succeed. And so then our Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, says, I met this previous Buddha, and I vowed to become a Buddha in the future to develop the perfections. And that Buddha said, you will do it, and your name will be Siddhartha Gautama. And so then everyone who's a bodhisattva has received or will receive a prediction from another Buddha. Don't try to do the math, because it doesn't work, right? There's only a few Buddhas, they're rare, but there's also an infinite number because time is infinite. Some beings are bodhisattvas, some are not, but time and space being infinite, those numbers are also infinite. Everyone has to get a prediction from a Buddha, right? It doesn't add up. What it does is it creates a mystery of relational transmission. That to be a bodhisattva is to connect directly, personally, in the flesh with a Buddha at some point in the vast span of cosmic history. And it doesn't matter if you did that cosmic eons ago and you're still just at the beginning of the path, because the future is endless and you made a vow. And it doesn't matter if you haven't done it yet, because you will, because the future is endless and you've made a vow. And what this turns into is a practice where the making of the vow is the whole thing. This is why bodhisattvas giving rise to the mind of enlightenment, called bodhicitta, becomes the center of the path. And vowing to become a bodhisattva, vowing to save beings by becoming a Buddha, becomes the heart of the ritual, right? So many of you will have heard the prayer from the Gelug version that that's popularized, and the many different versions in each of the different Tibetan streams. The one that the Dalai Lama often does, which is taken from Shantideva's Path of the Bodhisattva. May I be a bridge for those to cross over. May I be food for the hungry. May I be rest for the weary. As long as beings remain, may I remain in the world to dispel the ills of the world. And you have this practice then of calling on infinite compassion and vowing to save all beings by becoming a Buddha. And you do this, I think, by the beginning steps, the baby steps toward being able to do this. The Dalai Lama himself said, I can't claim to have attained bodhicitta, the mind of, the desire to be awakened, the vow to be awakened. He said, but I value it. I value it. That's humility. The dude is the incarnation of the bodhisattva of compassion. He says, I can't claim to have attained it, but I value it. So the encouragement here is you don't have to have attained, the insight into previous births or the vow to become a Buddha. But you can value it, and it becomes then a kind of worldview or an ethical, proposition. It's really a faith proposition that I think the baby step toward this is to admit your participation in the stream of time. I think we are invited here to open to the possibility that what we know in this tiny little lifetime, a few scattershot memories, between the age of 3 and 53, 50 years is nothing in the stream of time. That's all I've got. A few scattered memories and a couple of wacky dreams that extend out beyond those borders. But the invitation to admit our participation in something far vaster than this. And what happens when we do that? When we say, I'm open, I'm willing to be open to the possibility, you can hedge it as much as you want, I'm willing to be open to the possibility that I have been participating in the stream of birth and death in an unimaginably long lineage of relationship and pain and connection and gain and loss, and that I continue this, and that I will continue this until I'm done, until I find the end of this. And it's okay to not want to be done with it. Like, most people don't want to be done with it. Most people want to be reborn in heaven. May they be so, you know. And the Buddha's like, yeah, you're born in heaven, you can stay there for a very long time. Eventually you die from there and you're reborn somewhere else, you know. Some people just want more stuff. May they have it. Some people want more love. May they have it. And every once in a while someone comes along who says, I've had all of that so many times, and I'm ready to put it down. And what happens when a person does that? The Buddha says that Mara, the god of desire and this life and wanting, comes looking for you and says, no, you don't. Nobody puts this down on my watch. And the Buddha says, I'm putting it down. And Mara says, you can't. And the Buddha says, I'm putting it down. And at one point, one of the Buddha's disciples has become liberated, and the Buddha's declaring the rebirths of people, which is a thing he did a lot. It's one of his clairvoyant maneuvers. And they said, Blessed One, what's that black cloud like on the horizon? There's like a storm cloud, like doing weird things, moving against the wind. What's it doing? And the Buddha says, that's Mara the deceiver, looking for our friend, but our friend has gone beyond, and Mara cannot find him. So you want to go where Mara can't find you, and that is to the whatever happens when you've put it all down, and everything changes for you. Something that you didn't even know was happening ends, and you're different forever. Whatever forever means. The Buddha won't say where beings who are enlightened go after death. He says it's not the right question. You just get there. And you get free from Mara's grip. And then we'll talk. And you don't ask the question anymore once you know. So, all right. So we'll pause there. Blessings in the stream of time, wherever each of us is. And may our practice take us all the way to the end. All right. Thank you for being here, for your support. It's good.